guys, welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It's me, Steve Hall, and on the other end is Pascal Floor. How's it going, Pascal?
It's going well. It's going well.
May the 4th be with you.
Is it?
Didn't know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely.
I made sure Yoda was in shot. Baby Grogu, sorry.
Grogu. I just want to say, I'm not into that. I thought the other time that it was Baby Yoda because I didn't really catch up on season 2 and how it turned out and everything. That's why I never was aware that it's Grogu until you've told me.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought you liked The Mandalorian. You didn't enjoy it that much.
It was all right, but there are so many other things that I prefer watching. Okay. So, yeah, and I don't have Disney Plus, so that's a thing as well.
Yeah, it does hamper watching it to a large degree. But yeah, that's why if you haven't seen my story yet today, it's like I've just like Star Wars music on it all. Although I tend to put some Star Wars music on it anyway, just because Star Wars,
great.
You know?
Yeah, it is great.
And so you're not going to catch up for Obi-Wan either. Are you going to watch it?
I'm going to watch it. As long as it's not as shitty as probably the last, because I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard terrible things about it, like the last Star Wars movie.
Yeah, they as a true like Star Wars, like if you were just like, I don't know, you like Star Wars and it's kind of fun and it's like a cool universe, whatever, and you're not like serious into it and like you like the story and like things to make sense, this sort of thing. Yeah, I can see why you might really not like it because Boba Fett was a bit like that. It's kind of like I enjoyed watching it every single week, but when I reflected upon the storyline, I was like, what the fuck was that? Like like if you try and follow it as like actually a storyline, you're like, eh?
It's funny, Steve, because just recently I asked Katie of why is Hollywood so much up their own asses. I'm not a film expert or movie expert at all, right? But I wonder whether it is because they are living in their own small bubble, right? Everything that comes out of Hollywood, I would very much assume that. Have you ever watched, what is it called again? California. What is it called again? Californication?
That's a
Hank
song.
Moody and stuff.
I don't think I've seen it.
No? All right. He was kind of always in the movie industry, and they are kind of everything around Los Angeles, Hollywood, right? And everyone kind of knows each other. Also then Entourage, the HBO show back in like, I don't even know, ages ago. And I wonder whether the group of people is so niche and small that they are just like, I don't know, wanking each other off. And when someone is saying something, an idea, it's always like, yeah, that sounds amazing, let's do this. And they don't really recognize and acknowledge what other people have to say outside of that small circle. It's like, what do they know, right? What do they know? We are the movie houses and movie producers, right? And yet, here we are. They are being bashed the entire time. Ticket sales and all that kind of stuff is just like going down because they're just producing the same old shit over and over again, respinning it, recycling it, and also then TV shows. It's just like so many predictable things. And whenever there's something that is very, very unique and cool, it really stands out because they don't really have the balls anymore to actually take that.
Not that I'm a movie critic at all, and I'd say I'm actually incredibly ignorant to what makes a good movie and the industry. But one thing that sprung to mind when you said that was like Game of Thrones, like the stuff that they did in there, like it was stuff they just fucking killed off the main character. Like, yeah, it's just like, all right.
It's a perfect example. It's a perfect example. And then there are other TV shows where they are then kind of, and also Star Wars, it was the same thing, where they are then attacking the people criticizing that, and that are most of the time the true hardcore fans. And they have like legit criticism against that. Where it's like, what do they know? Fucking fans. And they were the ones actually carrying the entire project. And if you just like shit upon your fans, it's like, no wonder people start to hate the franchise.
Not to go on too much of a tangent. If anyone's,
sorry, guys.
You may have seen it. I think he's the biggest Star Wars like producer, like creator, sorry, like who is not obviously I don't know, part of Disney or anything. He's called Star Wars Theory, and I watch like a few of his videos now and then when I'm like just wanting something a bit outside of bodybuilding and everything else. So yeah, he breaks it down, and he's like I think he's the same age as us, and he's like a true like fell in love with Star Wars as a kid and is like true to the story, and he's not a big fan of the new like things that are coming out, and I think they call it like, I don't know, like
Fandom Menace.
No, I was going to say he's like not a fan of like I don't know, like the latest ones by Disney, but also they call it like, I don't know, old fans and like the new fans who came in because of, for example, Baby Yoda. They're just like, oh, that is so cute, I'm gonna love Baby Yoda, and now I love Star Wars. It's like, well, have you even watched the old ones, like the originals? I don't know. Anyway, it's a complete side story.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering because it kind of directly ties into. It's not the same though, because it's a little bit of a different level, of course. I could see that when you've produced so many very successful movies over decades, for example, that you, of course, start to believe that you can just produce whatever and it just sells, right? And what I was saying is that it's kind of similar to then the fitness industry, where we have like small cams, maybe even the entire evidence-based community, or the people who think that they are kind of hardcore bodybuilders. Because do you really watch kind of that entertainment fitness thing?
Me, no.
Like, there are probably people that we've never heard of who have millions of followers.
Yeah.
Right? Or like TikTok fitness or so. I have no idea, right? And of course, you then give them shit or so because you think that you are superior or anything alike, right? Or then we can even boil it down to kind of group thinking and those kind of smaller camps amongst the bodybuilding crowd where we are kind of interacting in. And I'm just wondering whether they are so full of their own stuff that they can't possibly see what's really outside of their bubble. Everyone is talking kind of about it, right? Like, not everyone in the literal sense, but so many people kind of shit on the movies, on the TV shows that are being produced, and they must see that. I wonder, like, or are you then so ignorant that you're just like, no, they don't know what they're talking about because we own the biggest TV or movie studios in the world, so it's just like small flies that we're just like pushing to the side or slap or so, you know? But I can see kind of the similarities to how our niche and how our small bubble sometimes interacts as well.
Yeah, I think it's a case of maybe like in their case, probably potentially in both cases, it's a case of like, we still have demand, we're still making money, like, so we can ignore the voices, even though if they're good voices of reason and it could make everything better and we can make more money or help more people, that's more effort. So at the moment, it's working how I'm doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it the way I'm doing it, and like, screw you guys. So, which is unfortunate because, yeah, sometimes I think that would lead to not like longevity within these industries and these people, but I don't know. I can't think of a good example of someone who has like been at that size, listened to like, I don't know, like evidence-based approaches and then like brought that into what they're doing. Because unfortunately, it just doesn't sell, does it? Like,
no.
Apart from like Jeff Nippard, but Jeff came from evidence-based and built his following through that. And he's done incredibly well, but I can't think of anyone who like was that big without it and then started to incorporate.
That's true. Anyway, enough about that. Man, how are you doing? What's going on in your life?
Yeah, because this is something we do, I think you probably do this in your check-ins as well. I'm always like, when people are like, oh, what should I talk about in my check-in? I'm like, obviously we have our vlog prompts and things like this, but I'm like, I want to know, like, when I ask you what's going on in your life, how have things been, what are the first things that come to mind, and talk to me about that, really, because the things that haven't been great, you're going to remember them. Whereas if there's something very small that just wasn't really impactful, like you don't have to try and remember it because it unlikely had much of an impact. So anyway, when you ask me, for whatever reason, my sleep hasn't been like I've been doing, like, you know, you do everything the same, but for whatever reason, you just don't wake up as well rested as you should. So I've had that recently, which has been frustrating me. And I've also had little signs, and I almost don't want to say it because when you say it, it's almost like it's coming true of
what's going
like my appetite, and I'm waking up feeling a little bit I can't put it any other way, but like, I don't know, full. I feel like I wake up and I'm like, I have no appetite, which I don't like that feeling because it brings back horrendous memories of force feeding. Yeah. So I'm just hoping that it's, and actually you could argue that both of them are a sign of the fact that this active recovery that I've coming in, not after next week, the week after next. So I'm taking an active recovery week and then a like deload week, and then I'll get into things, or like an intro week into the new meso, basically, like we've kind of talked about before. So it's kind of probably some signs that I need that in terms of just the way I'm feeling and like bringing food down to maintenance. I think it will just help my appetite come back up, because I don't want to mini cut yet. I don't think I need to in regards to like body comp. And I'm at like a size where I think performance is going to be good. So actually just talking to, I think it was Mike Chalice about this in his check-in. He was saying that he thinks a range of like, he gave himself a 10-pound range. I was like, I reckon it's more like a 20-pound range, but at the fringes of that, like the 5-pound fringes either end, you probably start seeing signs of you're going too far in either direction of leanness or mass. And I think for me, I'm kind of like, probably my 10-pound range is 185 to 195. When I push above 195, nearer 200, I start feeling some real ill effects. And when I go below 185 towards a 180, I start feeling some things that aren't great. So I'm right in that middle of that zone because I'm 190 pounds pretty much. So yeah, I don't want to mini cut anytime soon. It's tempting though to mini cut because especially once you've been, at least, I don't know if you feel any different now, Pascal, that you've been stage lean. But like once you've been stage lean, I don't know, you still have like, I don't know, you feel fatter than you are at higher body weights.
Yeah. Yes, that for sure. I mean, I'm not that far away from stage weight, and I'm feeling like I can't even see myself ever going to the body weight again where I came from. And at that time, I thought like I am not as fat as I actually then was. You know, what makes me just think is when you are feeling better in a tighter range, wouldn't it then make more sense to actually take advantage of that range more often, more frequently, in the sense of like maybe having more aggressive mini cuts and less aggressive gaining phases or so, or maybe have a shorter time frame of cutting phases and gaining phases, you know?
Yeah, so that would be my plan, in that I will take this active recovery and then probably have like 15 weeks more massing, which will probably take me up to like the upper end, nearer the upper end of that kind of range, and then I'll mini cut down to like the bottom end of it almost, pretty much, and then I'll gain back up nearer the top end and like again cycle back down to the bottom end there. Just
where I'm coming from with this is I just don't think it's a good idea to push yourself into a territory that makes you feel miserable. So in regards to maybe the upper end of body fat percentages, but also then the lower end. Yeah. And that we are just keeping that in the context of a gaining phase and off season, of course, right? And if you feel much, much shittier at a higher body weight, then of course, I wouldn't really recommend going up there, and maybe keeping that range a little bit more narrow and walk in that range where you feel good most of the time. And if we were to take some terminologies, we could actually put something like MAV. I know it's not really the best term for it, but maximum adaptive volume is where you want to be most of the time. And if we want to actually then apply it to something like the diet as well, some people have a wider spectrum, whereas other people have more of a narrow spectrum. And you want to, of course, be in the middle ground most of the time. And if you can't really go too far below, because then you are already getting into territories of like being very lean, and also you can't really push too high upwards as well, then being in that tighter range is probably a better bet instead of like always pushing the envelope.
Yeah, I think I actually like that idea. I think I may have thought about it before, but you've just reminded me of it. And I definitely think that's, like, I like the idea of, it's almost, and I think it's very much applicable, like there's a minimum level of body fat that you need to be productive for hypertrophy, but then there's like a maximum level. And then in the middle there, it's like your best level of body fat. So it very much applies to like volume landmarks, body fat landmarks, that sort of thing.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It makes a lot of sense
if RP is actually coming up with that kind of stuff at some point and they get all of the credit for it.
I've done a graph before where it's like, this is the sweet spot in terms of body fat for you, in terms of where you're performing the best. Because I definitely think like where you're recovering the best, performing the best, that's the body fat you're going to grow the most muscle at. And that's going to look different person to person. And I think I might be that individual that is on the leaner side versus like someone recently posted, I don't know, I was talking about massing, and I think some people look at me and they're like, Steve, you're still so lean for a mass. And I'm like, this isn't lean for me though. Yeah. This is like starting to get uncomfortable.
That's a very good point though. I think it's a very, very good point, because you could also make the argument of someone like Dirk, or Dirk as all the English guys are saying, like Dirk. Take a look at him now. He just finished a mini cut and he's still looking freaking amazing. Yeah. And other people would kill to look like this, like in general. But that's also probably one of the reasons why he won like Worlds, because he is the way he is. But people would look at him and be like, no, he's way too lean for an off season. When in reality, that's where he probably feels very, very good at right now. I know for other people, it's just a reality that perhaps also it is contributed to your body fat distribution as well. That you may not look as sharp in the off season, but you feel great. And maybe the body fat percentages are the same, but just due to the body fat distribution, it's also something that plays into it.
And that actually brings me to another point in terms of like how much muscle mass you have. Like Dirk is a well-muscled individual. He's also quite short, and so his muscle mass just looks crazy. So when he has a lower body, like you could have equal body fat to him, but if you're, I don't know, you have equal muscle to him, but you're way taller, again, you're not going to look as muscled as him, and so it's not going to look like you're as lean as that individual. So for me, like over a decade deep into this, I just have a decent amount of muscle mass. So you could be equally as lean as me, but I look different because I just have bumps and lumps underneath because I've spent years building it. So
basically also sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing on Dirk. I know for him specifically, just because you used him as an example, he's competing next year because he has to compete.
Due to the pro card.
Yeah, due to the pro card. So he has to stay a bit tighter. So that's this, like, I don't have that consideration. I'm not going to compete next year. It's just, there's no point me doing that, I don't think. Whereas maybe in 24, I won't push the envelope as much because I have to like bear in mind I've got shows to get lean for.
Man, this is still such a fucked up thing because so many things are directly coming from the enhanced bodybuilding realm. And this is one of them as well. Also, a lot of peak week protocols, for example, have been or came from enhanced bodybuilding, which don't really make a lot of sense if you then do apply those to something like natural athletes. And this is one of them as well, that you have to compete as a pro like in 2 years' time. It's just, I mean, for older individuals, yeah, I can see that. But for younger individuals, such as Dirkus as well, it's just, sorry, but this is fucked up as a natural organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think I can see why they do it. Like, I don't know, to keep people, like to keep it relevant and like to keep people on their toes. And I don't know, I just don't know why there needs to be a time limit on it as such, or maybe such a short time limit for sure. Just, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I believe the president of the WNBF was actually interviewed by the Natty News Gang. And he made some valid points, which I can understand. But still, it's like, I don't know. I think the people it hurts are those. So I don't know, just randomly as an example, imagine in 2017, if I went pro, like just somehow because of who turned up or whatever, that would hurt me as an athlete because I had my best off season after that. And if it was cut short after 2 years, I certainly wouldn't have made as much progress. So I think those who earn pro cards maybe a little bit early in their career and a little bit too early and maybe haven't like made, they're not like a good pro at that stage. Maybe they aren't quite pro caliber and they've been a bit lucky and fortunate in terms of getting it. It's almost like it's unlucky because it's like now you've kind of got this and you're never going to have like a long enough off seasons to make like huge progress. And I think there are those who do make huge progress in such a short period of time. They're just like some of the elite in terms of and I hate to say it's genetics, but like there's not many people who are going to make leaps and bounds of progress in like an actual, like, what is it going to be? So 1 year, because you have to recover from the previous competition and then you have to diet for the next one. So in terms of actual productive training time, it's a fairly short period of time.
Exactly. And that's my point. I mean, as an enhanced athlete, yeah, sure, no worries.
Yeah.
I mean, you can easily then compete next year and you've still built like 10, 20 pounds of muscle mass most of the time. But that's unrealistic for a natural athlete, and especially considering how lean people get nowadays and how long it then takes to recover, be in a proper position to then be able to build. It's like you said, how much time do you then effectively have for then building? It's half a year to maybe a year, maybe. But most of the time, it's like somewhere in between of like half a year up to a year. Yeah. And that's not a lot of time. And if you just think about it, what is it that you want to do with a show, a bodybuilding show? You want everyone to have a good time. And also, as well, you want to have a good presentation for then the audience as well. It's kind of also about kind of entertainment there, right? And I think that even Andrew Chappelle said it, that when you're up there, you're the actor. So people paid to some extent to see you up there.
Yeah.
So do your job and actually then also showing something to the people, and not just for them, but also then for the judges as well.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I think Jeff Albert's also is big on that in terms of like, you want to present yourself like well on stage. It doesn't surprise me that the people who are big into like posing and they're good posers, like they understand the importance of that.
Can I just say something about Jeff? The older I become, the more training experience I have, the more I understand what Jeff is actually talking about. I always thought that I knew what he was talking about when he actually said something about longevity when I was younger, when I was a younger trainee as well. And I said like, yeah, longevity, but I didn't really 100% understand his philosophy, his thought process, and the things that he was saying. I heard the words, but I didn't really understand them in the right context. And the older I become, the more I truly understand what it is that he said, especially when it comes to, for example, the realistic rates of muscle gain, and also then the progress overall. Take a look at Jeff. I mean, yes, he is genetically also up there. That's for sure, right? But he has been doing this since such a long time. And just understanding then that when it comes to bodybuilding, time is your best friend. The earlier you start, the more time you can invest into this, the better off you will be at some point.
Yeah.
And the more advanced you will also be, and the more genetically blessed you will probably also be. I would very much, or could imagine that if you or I started at the age of 13 with lifting, we would now also be deemed as like genetically blessed after like over 20 years of training experience.
Yeah, I think it, because I don't know how many of the listeners know that I was coaching Dave McConey, but he did a review of the coaching that we did together, and we've done a podcast together now. And he was saying about his training experience, and he said something along the lines of like, I think it's like 16 years of like serious training, but it was like 18 years of like actually going to the gym consistently. And then I looked at mine and I was like, I always I used to try and undershoot, like when I said how many years I trained, I always tried to say less years rather than more, because I wanted to like be like, oh yeah, I've made this much progress under this many years. Mm-hmm. But when I reflected upon talking to Dave, and he was like, oh yeah, I was super consistent, I trained hard. When I actually think about it, I probably started like being consistent in the gym, as in I would train like 4 times a week, every week, training hard from the age of 16. Like, if I'm honest, I had then my accident, which took me back a few steps. So maybe we can remove a year, but I'm close to 15 years of training myself now. And now I'm further into it. Like it completely, I don't know, it's just you get into that period of time after you're a decade in where like anyone who's been seriously training for a decade is going to be looking pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And then you add another decade on top of that, and that's like something like Jeff, who's been training that long, like you're going to be looking special.
I think that I can't really recall where I've picked that up, but somewhere, once again, I have no idea, not even the slightest clue where I picked it up, but nearly with every skill that you are that you have or you're building, time is your best friend, so to speak. You will see the best results the most or the more time you have dedicating it to that specific task. And that's why it sometimes also may perceive or be perceived as such that someone has just like, I don't know, they were so lucky or they always made the right choices, when in reality they just had time on their side. One of them, and nearly everyone who knows him, you can think of him what you want, is Warren Buffett, for example. Man, he's coming close to being 100 years old. And he has invested since like, I don't know, 80 years or so. And basically, it is just that time that made him to one of the wealthiest people on earth. Yeah, sure, he had also some very, very good some good choices in there and picking and choosing the right stocks at the right time. But that doesn't mean that he's a freaking genius or so, right? Because a genius would, like, I don't know, pick one or two out of one or two, and then all of a sudden, yeah, what? And due to fundamental reasons and all that kind of stuff, right? And he had lots of losers, but a few winners that made it all up. But what really stands out is just the length that he has been in the market. And if you then think about something like, I don't know if you've ever looked into something like compound interest, the earlier you start, the more of an exponential increase you have later down the line. And the more you can take advantage of that as well. And the same applies to skills as well. The earlier you start and the more time you can have, the more likely it is that you are actually then successful and have a huge wealth of knowledge or whatever. Of course, there are always the outliers where then the rewards will actually show up very, very early on in their careers as well. Such as, for example, we know a couple of examples, we always bring them up, right? But where it's like after 4 years of lifting, they look like someone who has been lifting for 20 years or so.
Yeah.
These are the outliers though, and most of the time, and I think that people very much underestimate the power of time. And you can't really turn back time, unfortunately, and start lifting earlier. We just have to accept that it is what it is. And if you are right now there at a point where you don't really, or you're not really satisfied with the progress anymore, you may have to come to terms with that is the progress that is now there for the next couple of years. There's nothing that you can do about it unless actually jumping on steroids or so. And if you want to change something, you just have to tick off the boxes.
I think the Warren Buffett example is like what a post you made recently, and it's people see the iceberg, like the peak of the iceberg. They don't see all of the like the time underneath that's gone into it or what's made that peak available. And I think that happens, like an example I think of, it's like Matt Ogus. People look at him and they're like, oh my God, this guy, like he must be on steroids, whatever. He's just a pure good example because he's so large on social media, at least he was in our age bracket. And it's like he'd been training so long and they just discount all of that and they just make accusations. And it's probably the same with Warren Buffett in that they're like, oh, he's so lucky, blah, 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 or whatever. It's like, no, it's not really luck here.
I think it's in the book, The Psychology of Money. It's a fairly new book where he then talks about that as well. And he compares if Warren Buffett had invested like 10 years later, it would have been substantially different. He wouldn't have nearly as much as he has nowadays. And just due to that of being in the market for a longer period of time. And that's, I mean, let's be real here. It's kind of the same when it comes to bodybuilding as well. And it's such a slow thing for the vast majority of people that at some point you will probably gain such little amount of muscle mass that you won't really be able to tell on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis. You will have to really, really work hard. And I don't really like the term of like trust the process in many ways, but there is something to it there for sure, because this is where you just like have to do that stuff what we know that works, and just like kind of hope for the best. And in reality, most of the time something is changing, but your expectations, they don't really match the reality. And this is then where then you get less motivated, disheartened, and then you stop, or you don't really put as much effort into it anymore. And that in return, once again, causes you to see even less progress, right? So, yeah, that's basically the point I wanted to make.
I know I used this example when I taught through your post over on Instagram, which you should be following Pascal_Floor if you're not.
I have great Instagram posts over there. Yes. Good insights and all.
And I was like, it's like creatine. We take creatine, not because, like, I'd love to hear someone comment saying, like, there's probably someone out there who's listening who has taken creatine and they've like, yeah, I noticed strength gains, blah, blah, blah. Fuck. I didn't notice anything when I take creatine. I just take creatine every day because I know it's doing, like, under quote, I'm pretty darn sure, like 99% sure it's doing what it needs to be doing in terms of the benefits creatine provides. But I don't notice if I take creatine out the difference because it's so small. And that's the thing for like when you're an advanced trainee, you might be making such small progress. It's like I'm sat here, I don't notice the earth is spinning, but it's fucking spinning. It's just spinning so slowly.
That's a great example as well.
You can't notice. Yeah. So you just do all your due diligence. You take your creatine, you do your training, you know what's going to grow muscle, and you have to, like you said, trust that process. Because, yeah, it's not that you're trusting the process because it's evidence, it's science, it works. It's just it's so slow that you almost don't know if it is working, but you do it anyway. And that's what I've seen for myself, my clients, where they tick the boxes each and every day. And the ones who do it the longest get the best results. And the people that unfortunately only do a few months, they just, I think maybe sometimes are under the false impression that results should come like faster and there's some kind of magic dust that I'm going to sprinkle on their program. It's just like, no, it's just you have to keep doing it. And eventually after like maybe years of doing this, we'll see some real significant changes. But once you've been training like almost close to a decade, like it's going to be slow, unfortunately.
And the thing is kind of, what is it called again? Is it counter-correlated? So basically with more experience and more training age comes less progress. And unfortunately, then you have to just like keep on digging, and you can't really expect that then things will change massively, because otherwise, the people who have been in the game the longest would also be directly the biggest and the strongest. And that is, of course, is not always the case. Of course, there's a high likelihood that you are then kind of up there. But as we know, especially for physique sports, other factors play into that as well. And that a high part of it is just genetics. But I am someone who's under the opinion that something like the genetic seeding is something that you will never reach most of the time because of time. Right? And because you may actually then run into a wall, you have to actually then tinker and tweak around in order to figure out like what works. And because you can't really measure that progress in the short term, you have to then spend time there, which is time being taken away from you. Right? And that time is actually so crucial for you to actually see some good progress. Because at some point, we will see the declination, right? Where it's like, you will really not see the progress due to your natural decline. So, because time is the limiting factor for the vast majority of people, I think it doesn't really matter to think about the genetic seeding, because chances are you will never see that. And if you think that you are there, chances are it's just that you, that what it is that you've experienced up to this point simply may not work anymore, or the amount that you get in return has just also declined.
yeah, it's just happening potentially. The progress is so slow. Like I said, with the Earth spinning, you can't ever notice it. And it's so hard to track it at that stage as well. So you then, like you said, you either reach like time then peters out and you're now in a period where you're kind of trying to hold on to as much muscle as possible as you're aging and you're seeing that process kick in, or you decide it's just not worth it and you're like, right, and this is a great thing to potentially come to, and this is what me and Dave talked about as well, where he's going to go back to his lower frequency training, higher intensity training, because he can do like way less volume and just maintain the progress he's made. And I said to him, it's a hard one, because I'd love to say, I was like, and in our chat, I was like, I'd love to say it's just more time, and like everything was going how I expected it to go, but I think we just needed more time. But you could also see that as like a cop-out answer. Like I can't know that more time would have bred something, but I'm pretty sure it would, because he also said, if I knew that doing this level of like ticking the boxes and like really focusing on it would grow me like 1 to 2 pounds of muscle over the next number of years, I'd do it. But I was like, but you can't guarantee that. And so if you can't guarantee it, is it worth the risk of you not growing that? Whereas for me personally, I don't try and think about that. I'm just like, I'm just going to do it, and it's going to happen because like I know this, and it should be happening. There's no reason it shouldn't happen. Like you said, I don't believe in the genetic ceiling. Like I believe in it. It's a thing. I just don't think many people, if anyone, ever reaches it. And you can never know anyway, so there's no point thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to make it clear, right? I believe that there is a genetic seeding probably, right? But what it is unknown, I think, with the technology that we have right now to figure out. At some point, probably we can do so much manipulation that we can get there in our lifespan as well. And then after that, it becomes more of an issue because we are running risk of like, I don't know, cardiac diseases and all that kind of stuff, because the body can't really carry that much muscle mass anymore and all that kind of stuff, right? With that being said, now you brought up like Dave twice, and this is not a chat about like Dave and his review or so, right? It's just, it comes up, of course, and it makes me then think, but this is not like specifically addressing Dave's takes or so. It's just a general take on the thing about what Jeff has been preaching all the time of like being patient, depositing the pennies into the bank account, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it just makes... once again, the older I become, the longer I've been in that game for, the more I realize what it actually is that he was talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree, because it's just such a, once you've been doing it a long time, it's just such a slow process. If you try and, I don't know, it's like when people take physique shots every week, and they're like a natty and they're like, they've been training a decade. It's like, what do you expect to see every week apart from just more fat on your physique? I'm just like, like it just is demoralizing. So I don't even focus. I'm not like constantly seeking a PR. I'm just like, I go into the gym, I'm going to beat last week. Just keep doing this. Like, and if I can make small incremental progress where maybe I can beat last mesocycle's performance by a rep, amazing. Like, that's fantastic for me. It might take 2 mesocycles to beat it by a rep. Like, there's just, you got to then enjoy the process and just, like Jeff says, like, don't focus too much on the outcomes and just keep focusing on what you need to do every day to produce the results you want. And hopefully, and in my experience, they do come.
So Steve, we're left with kind of 3 body parts. I mean, you could always chuck it into smaller body parts and stuff, but we have like the 2 of them you have very strong genetics with. I would say one of them is kind of not so great. Can you guess what it is?
What do I have? Okay, so glutes, arms, biceps. Sorry, glutes and biceps, strong genetics, and what's the other one? What's going to be left? What haven't we done? Because I know we've done quads, right? So calves, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Calves. Yeah, calves.
The other one, so we did the biceps, but I was referring to the delts. And funny enough, last week I said like, "Oh man, your delts, they look so jacked." And then there was someone in the comment section saying like, "I'm not trying to hate, but Steve's delts don't exist." So that's why I want to cover the delts here this time, just to get it out of the way. Yeah, exactly. So Steve, as always, we are beginning with then the exercise selection for then the delts.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
Okay. And this is specifically side delts?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So I think it's become relatively well known, at least in our little niche, that overhead pressing is overrated for side delts. I think a lot of people think of shoulder press, that was building the shoulders, so I should be doing it. It's like, well, yeah, it's really good for the anterior delt, and you get very minimal side delt. I think like when I do an overhead press, I don't feel anything in my side delt personally. I feel it very much my anterior delt. It generally just feels a bit awkward, and I feel it in my triceps. So yeah, I don't think overhead pressing for a lot of people is going to be their bread and butter. For side delts, it's going to be lateral raises and those sort of variants. So that might be Y raises, very similar to lateral raises, and also like upright rows. Again, it's just moving your elbows out to your side, essentially, kind of abducting that arm. And so like you've got loads of choice, and I think variation should be used and kind of see what feels right to you. I normally will program for people like a cable variation. Generally, people find that to be really decent. As we've discussed before, you brought it up, like with dumbbells, when you're down at the bottom there, it's gravity like pushing you down, so that, like, there's no tension necessarily there. I think when you're doing them though, like they can feel good to do now and then. Like I have thrown them in now and then. I'm like, oh yeah, these feel great. And then, but cables for me are more bread and butter in terms of kind of lateral raise motions. And then I do like cable Y raises. I haven't actually been able to do cable Y. I can't do them at my gym at the moment because they don't have a cable that's close enough. They're like really wide apart, so you can't do a cable Y raise. I've tried a dumbbell Y raise. It doesn't feel quite right to me in the same way as a cable Y raise does. And I also like cable lateral raises from behind and like crossing them over. That works really nicely, but a single arm works just as well too. And then if you've got a machine lateral raise, that's also great. That can work really nicely. I do have access to that, so that kind of makes up for not having the cable Y raise. And then upright rows, I think they're all right. I don't think the SFR is as good for the side delts, but you get quite a bit of traps as well. So if you're like, I also want to build my traps, but I don't want to put in a load of shrugs, then I think you can put some upright rows into your program as well and kind of get a bit of both. Obviously, you're going to hit the traps with lateral raises as well. You're not going to kind of isolate the side delt completely, but I think you isolate it a little bit more than when you're doing an upright row. And again, cables, barbells, that sort of thing. Some people don't get on with upright rows, and some people also just don't perform them very well because they like really limit their range of motion or they swing them. Same with same with lateral raise variations. So my kind of main point is lateral raise variations are going to be your bread and butter. Some upright rows, some cable like Y raises can also be put in there as well, and I think they can be really decent. Overhead press is overrated in my opinion for side delts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have nothing really to add. You said you have a huge variety of exercises in the lateral raise variations though, right?
Yes.
I think there aren't really that many great exercises for then the side delts, except for then lateral raise variations of like cables, dumbbells, machines, and that's basically it. And also there you can then play a little bit around with maybe having them behind your back, then in front of yourself, maybe having the arms angled a little bit more to a 45-degree angle, right? And this way, just play a little bit around with what really feels most natural and also strongest for you, and where you also feel it the most, of course, in your side delts, instead of like, I don't know, you have the feeling that you do a lot with just raising the arms or anything like, right? Just play a little bit around. You can pick and choose from a huge variety of exercise in the lateral department. And yeah, same as you, I have like different variations throughout my entire program as well. And this is also how I handle things within my clients, so that it's not too monotonous on a daily basis, especially when the frequency is high. I don't really want them to do just like dumbbell lateral raises like 4 or 5 times per week, especially also due to connective tissue. If then the strength profile and resistance curve may then have a little bit of a different effect on then connective tissue, that is something that I want to take advantage of as well.
Yeah, I think that's where that variation comes in most handy, is just for connective tissue and just for hitting the like side delt musculature in a slightly different way. Like it's a little bit more challenging in the lengthened or the shortened position. It's just good for like being able to tax the muscle keep the SFR of the whole week higher, actually.
Yes. Then we are, of course, already coming to volume.
So volume for side delts, I mean, on the very low end, I would say maybe as little as 4 sets, but I can't say I often, maybe if someone's on a very low frequency, they can't get into the gym much and we're prioritizing bigger compound lifts, maybe we're as little as 4, but probably more common is like 6 sets on the low end. And then up to, I mean, like this is one of the muscle groups where you can get into like the 20s. It's kind of like if the person just can keep recovering well, their frequency is relatively high, like 4 times a week in and around there, you can get up to like 5 sets a session, 20 sets by the end of the meso quite comfortably. So, I mean, for me, I don't know about you, Pascal, and I very rarely ever get a client reporting this like soreness or like under recovery in the side delts. Just
hardly ever.
Nah.
Maybe in the first week when you had a longer layoff and you're just like going from 2 times per week up to like 5 or 6 times per week, then maybe, but barely ever is that the case. Most of the time, what it is that you're first experiencing is some kind of shoulder injuries or kind of aches and niggles and pain instead of any kind of muscular fatigue going on.
Yeah, for me, like this is why when you brought up how frequent you were like hitting your side, I don't know if you were quite doing this, but it was almost every day. I was like, I probably, like for a long time, I would do like side delts on my push day and then upright rows on my pull day, because upright rowing is pulling, but so there's like enough variation there. So I've done 4 times per week frequencies for myself for like, very rarely would I ever drop lower than 4 times a week. That seems to be my kind of where I stick most of the time, but yeah, I've just never noticed. I don't know, they're one of those muscle groups where you could just chuck so much at them, like even calves. Like I've done a lot of calf volume, but my calves will get sore. Like they will get like cleared, like damage, but side delts, no.
I mean, we are kind of covering frequency in the same instance as well. But I totally agree with you. You can just like ramp it up, and I don't even know the ceiling of doing side lateral volume, to be honest. No. I've pushed it all the way up to like 25 to even 30 or so. And even there, you could have probably kept on going. And before you're then noticing any kind of muscular or systemic fatigue, you will then feel it from a connective tissue perspective. I think that this is often the limiting factor. And these are things that you always have to take into consideration as well. It's kind of like the 3 pillars, or sometimes also time comes into play, but especially in systemic fatigue, muscular fatigue, and also connective tissue fatigue or joint fatigue. One of those 3 things will give in first. Muscular fatigue is hardly ever the thing. Often people can ramp up their tolerance of what they can handle muscularly speaking over weeks, right? But then at some point it will then run into systemic fatigue or then connective tissue things or issues. Now with then the shoulders and also just in particularly side delts, volume, don't know what the seeding really is. That's why as long as you are staying in a relative good range, intensity is there, and you have like a frequency of maybe like 4. So you can even do it like from 2 all the way up to 6. You don't have to then do them 4 times per week. But I think in the middle is a sweet spot, especially considering that they don't really require a lot of focus, a lot of energy, and often you can just chuck them into a session unless you've completely I don't know, shoot yourself out with something like quads or hamstrings or so. Even then, it can be challenging to get yourself to doing some side lateral raises. That being said, though, often what I've found is that you can bump up the frequency quite nicely, then just like do 3 or 4 sets, something like this. Sometimes even just like as little as 2 sets, just to get a little bit of a stimulus towards that body part. And also, because it doesn't really require a lot of time, and it works quite well with metabolite techniques, you can nearly always chuck it into one single session without it requiring a lot of dedication and also time. And yet you're still providing a little bit of a stimulus towards that body part. And that is why I think certain exercises, also abs, for example, is one of them as well, you can nearly always do them in a session, given that you have still some time and also energy left to do those. So if you have like a split where you find yourself that you actually have still some time left over in a session, I could always see myself like throwing in another round of something like lateral raises.
Yeah, I find like if we're 2 sets in the lower rep ranges, most people need like 3 sets to really get like a decent, say, pump going, where they're like, oh yeah, now my delts feel like they've done something. Whereas in the like 15 plus rep range, like if you do a couple of sets of that, they're already feeling like, oh yeah, like I've got something going on. So I definitely agree with you there. And they do work pretty well with metabolite techniques, and they really don't take much out of you. I don't know if it's just psychological for me, but like ab training, I actually have to like really like, right, I'm going to get in the zone. I'm going to do some actual ab training. Whereas like delts, I enjoy doing delts. Like I'm good for delts. So it doesn't take much to, if you could start a leg session with delts and it's not really going to take anything away from the rest of that leg session if you want.
And I mean, you've touched on like repetition range, and you said something about lower repetitions. What is kind of the lowest range or rep range that you would go with for something like side delts?
So 10 to 15, like a lot of my isolation movements or like the accessory movements, not like compound lift variants would be 10 to 15. Even for like an upright row, some people might, I don't know, if you're like super fast twitch or something in your side delts, maybe you could try like a 8 to 12 or something. But I find most people, when they go that heavy, they just end up trying to use too much load, start swinging, and they feel it, like you said, in like joints and connective tissue more than like the actual side delt. For me personally, like 15 to 20 reps is like a really good sweet spot for delt work. When I talk, like I always just use like 10 to 15 and 15 to 20, whereas like 15 is probably a very good sweet spot in that regard. And I have gone higher than 20 reps, but not like consistently going above that. I find like once you hit like in and around 20, going much higher, you don't really get more and more benefits of what the higher reps bring. It's just, you're just doing more reps. So yeah, it's 10 to 20 reps basically. Seems to be like in and around the sweet spot for me.
Yep. Same here as well. I mean, thing is, once you go higher, the first repetitions just feel like as if nothing is really happening. And what it is that you could be using is then intensity techniques of like shorter rest times in between the sets, for example. Right, and especially when you're short on time, you can always then cut some time on something like delt work, where it's like, oh, just have shorter rest times, or even use something like myo match sets or anything alike.
Yeah, they work well for myo match actually. I do like using them for that. Actually, I like doing a like lateral raise into an upright row. So those work quite well as like and I've even done now and then. They're actually very effective. I don't often use tri-sets, so I use like 3 delt movements. I'll go from like a lateral raise into like an upright row into like a rear delt fly with like dumbbells. Those can actually work really well, and they like just your shoulders as a whole, like the pump in the shoulder as a general whole, like is great. And you could do 2 rounds of that, and you're just like, my shoulders are blown up. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Tips and tricks.
So I would say for sure a tip is like, I don't think zero momentum is the answer, because I think you can go too strict with a like, especially like a dumbbell lateral raise where you're just like, I don't know, you see someone fail and you're like, man, I reckon you're 5 reps. But it's because they're trying to use like perfect zero momentum. But because especially for a dumbbell lateral raise, it's so much harder in that like top position, like using a bit of, it's like a lat pull down, for example, like it's so much harder down at your chest. Use like some drive, I'd almost call it, versus momentum. It is a little bit of momentum, I guess, from the muscle. You can just get the SFR just improves. But this is what I'd say to people is like experiment with the amount you're using and be honest with yourself, because I think you can go heavier and then you use a bit more momentum and your SFR just starts going like you're trying really hard to get these reps up, but you finish the set and you're just like, I'm physically exhausted. The reps looked a bit ugly and I don't feel great and my shoulders don't feel blown up. Whereas if you go like find that sweet spot in the middle of like super strict to like a bit of momentum, I think that can work really nicely for people. That's at least one kind of tip or trick.
That would have also been my biggest things to avoid is going too heavy.
Yeah.
Because you're very tempted to actually load it up because it just seems wrong with the amount of load that you're using when you're properly targeting the delts. And I've used, so leg extensions and also side delt work is something that I'm using much less load than a couple of years ago. And you could think that if you just were to compare like previous training logs from like several years ago to now, that I've gotten significantly weaker. But in reality, I just know now how to target the musculature. And even on something like side laterals with dumbbells, I'm using like a chest support, so leaning on the bench, for example, for that, to really take out a little bit too much the momentum, because you can also take too much momentum, where you're then kind of swinging it up and then leaning back and all that kind of jazz. To avoid that I'm actually putting myself into a better position with then having a little bit of a chest support on an incline bench. And there, I'm using like 7 or 8 kilograms. And that may seem wrong at first, especially when you're taking out the dumbbells, but that's what it is. And also on the tower that I'm using with the crossover side laterals, I'm using like 5 kilograms. And it looks weird, but that's what it is that you most of the time need.
That's just so I think I'm literally doing I'm doing dumbbell butterfly lateral raises, or like full run ones, whatever, where you come slightly overhead. I'm using 8 kilos for those at the moment. And same with like I went actually up to the 10. It's probably not quite the same as on your stack, but I'd been using the 5 for ages. I've just gone up to the 10 on the kind of cable machine for like side laterals there. And that's actually in kind of things to avoid, like using too much load. Is also looking to increase load too quickly. So people will be like, oh, I'm using 8s this week, so next week I'll use 10. And that's a huge load increase in terms of a percentage. Yeah. And so you have to realize that. And so you might want to add reps for a number of weeks before you look to add any load at any point, because it's such a large percentage increase.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's pretty straightforward, actually. Yeah. You can't really mess it up too much with delts. You can actually push it a lot in terms of frequency without suffering the immediate consequences. You can play around with the way that you're doing them, with the rep range, what works best for you. So there are many, many ways to go about it without kind of fucking things up. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, the side delts are one of the most aesthetic muscles on the physique. If you have big, bolder shoulders, like it just looks freaking great. And the good news is, if you do them start of your upper body sessions, it doesn't really take away from the compound movements, really. So if you want to prioritize them, you could put them first. I'm not saying you have to. It's just, I'd been thinking about it because I split my upper body sessions AM, PM. And so I actually start my PM sessions with side delts work. Always, every single one. So that's 3 sessions a week. But I'm almost like, maybe I want to start my AM sessions with side delts. I just want them to be fucking big, especially after that guy's comment. It made me really self-conscious. I'm sitting here and I'm like, should have worn a jumper, man.
That's why I'm always wearing that shirt. No, cool. That's basically it for this week.
Yeah.
As always, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, for listening. Once again, I really do hope that you take something away from that kind of muscle, how to train that insert muscle group training guide. As always, a quick reminder, I am turning those into a written format as well, so that you can have those in your inbox and always come back to reading them and also rewatching them, of course, as well. They are always available. And other than that, guys, I guess I speak to you next week.
See you guys.
Cheers.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Steve. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.